Okay, let's see. It's now broadcasting to all attendees. All right. So I think we'll just wait one more minute for people to shuffle in, and then we'll jump off. All right. We will just jump in here. All right. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. It's the latest in the Climate Change and WASH webinar series orchestrated by the European Microfinance Platform, WASH Action Group. The Action Group is funded by e-MFP and Aqua for All, who organized this webinar today with the help of WaterEquity, UNICEF, and UNICEF Malawi, as well as the government of the Republic of Malawi. For those who do not know, the e-MFP Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene WASH Action Group has been operating since 2021 to expand and share knowledge on the WASH sector with the helpful steering of Aqua for All. Before starting, however, a few notes on the institutions represented today. WaterEquity is an asset manager exclusively focused on mobilizing private investments in water and sanitation in emerging markets, while UNICEF is, of course, very active in the WASH space, as shown by the partnership between UNICEF Malawi and the government of the Republic of Malawi, which in recent years wrote the Malawi Climate Resilient WASH Financing Strategy 2022 through 2032. The aim for us today in this webinar is to connect the dots between COP28, Malawi's strategy, and WASH financing more broadly. So we hope this is going to be a fruitful discussion. And yeah, without further ado, I'll give the floor to today's moderator, Dr. Mónica Altamirano de Jong. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you very much for the invitation to moderate this. I will be also soon introducing each of our panelists, but here is just a very short introduction on financing, water security, and a little bit about, very shortly about our journey from households to climate resilient infrastructure. We can go to the next, please. Jack, we can go to the next. So I think Jack already told about us. So just here to mention that we are an innovation of the nonprofit water.org, which is much older than us, and there is still some cooperation with them, right? Maybe the next one. I will go a little quick because this is just a very short intro on what we mean with climate resilient and investments in water. So I think most of you know us also from our work on affordable financing at household level for access to water and sanitation, like the microloans that are given to people to be able to have that service at home. But what I'm going to talk about you today very briefly is more our additional line of work, which refers to climate resilient infrastructure, in which we're looking how to invest on companies or consortia that are implementing projects to add climate resilience. If we go to the next first, please. Oh, yes. And why, right? Why to go from household towards climate resilient infrastructure? And basically it's because I think it has become clear through the materiality of climate impacts that most of the effects are felt through the water cycle, right? And so extreme weather events are stretching the capacity of our existing water and sanitation systems. We will talk more about that in a moment, but also we know that the most vulnerable communities, which have been always our focus, are the ones who will feel the worst effect of that, or both floods and droughts, either because they live in flood-prone areas or because they live at the end of water and sanitation networks, experiencing as more than anyone else the effects of too little water. And we also know that by 2025, which is just like a year from now, half of the population might be living in water stress areas. So if we go to the next, that has been the reason. Can we go? The next, that we are working on expanding, right? The mandate of our investments and our impact objectives. Normally, we have been financing anything that can contribute to access to water and sanitation for those underserved communities. And we are now also looking at investments that will reduce the pollution loads going into freshwater bodies and impacting freshwater ecosystems. So adding to water quality and also mitigating the impacts of water scarcity. And there are a number of interventions where you can, right, do that. It could be a wastewater treatment plan regarding quality or reduction of non-revenue water in scarcity. But what I want actually to take my last minute of explanation is in the next slide. That explains, if we can move, Jack, that explain, and don't be frightened by this, but if we want to look at climate resilience, right, we will have to embrace some level of complexity and look at it systemically, because basically it depends on that water cycle that connects so many parts of our economy. And what we see there is that we are looking not just at the resilience of, for example, the assets, so it could be a wastewater treatment plant, not only the capacity of that asset to withstand the shocks, climate shocks, but actually how that investment in that business model of that company is impacting the capacity of communities, urban infrastructure systems, and watersheds to react to those stresses, right? And I think the most common stresses are, of course, flooding and heavy rainfall, drought, sea level rise, and heat waves. And if you see those three levels, they are very interconnected, right? The communities, why are we looking at the resilience benefit for communities, is because they are our target group. But if the urban infrastructure system is what provides those communities of the services, but ultimately where the water comes from is from the watersheds, right? And so if we look, for example, at heat waves, and I don't know can you see them in the slide? I don't see them very clearly. Is the last one? Okay, now let's look at droughts. So basically what happened, we have a year that doesn't rain less than, can we go? Sorry, yes, we will look at, let's look at why do we need to look at these three levels, right? So if we look at droughts, basically, we have a year that doesn't rain enough. Maybe there is not enough water going to those freshwater ecosystems that we need to regulate too much or too little water. That's a long-term effect, right? But then immediately we also get an increase in inefficiency, cost, blockages, and interruptions in services. And who will be mostly affected by that immediately are those groups who already have poor access or not a 24/7 availability of water, right? So what we're trying to do, and it's not an easy task, is to be able to assess every investment, not just for the capacity to withstand of the asset itself, but how does it contribute to the coping capacity at these three levels. With that, I think our colleagues here in the panel will tell you much more about what they are doing at national level and also from a technical assistance point of view. So I would like to go now to introduce our speakers. So first, I would like to introduce, we can take out the presentation, Jack. Jorge Alvarez-Sala, which is a water and sanitation specialist with over 20 years of international experience in the sector, and has worked in pretty much every continent of the world. He works now with UNICEF in New York and is responsible for the water portfolio. And as you know, UNICEF is the UN leading agency in drinking water and sanitation, with water and sanitation and hygiene programs in over 100 countries, and doing annual investments of more than $1 billion per year. So with that, I would like to leave you with Jorge.
Thank you very much, Mónica. I hope you can see. I think you can see the slides. I hope you can see me in a second. I will have a very brief presentation, I will start and acknowledging that some of you are coming from the finance world and are not necessarily water and sanitation experts. I will have a brief introduction on key concepts when we are speaking about water and climate. I will then explain what UNICEF is doing in addressing the climate crisis in water and sanitation, and I will end up with a brief introduction on why COP28 in Dubai that was held in December 2023 was so important for the water sector. So without further delay, I would like to start with move to the next slide. As I said, a very brief context and introduction of key concepts. This is a screenshot from a recent publication that UNICEF launched during COP28 about how climate change is changing children, and there's three definitions that I believe could be relevant for this audience. The first one is water stress, which is a concept that is the ratio between demand of water and supply. Water scarcity, as defined by UNICEF, is more a composite index, is a combination of different indicators, including water stress, groundwater availability, interannual availability, seasonal variability, and then drought events. But maybe the most relevant for the water and sanitation sector is the concept of water vulnerability, which is the combination of water scarcity with access to water and sanitation services. Without services, there is no water security, there is high levels of water vulnerability. And we estimated that 436 million children globally live in areas affected by high or extremely high water vulnerability. Now, we're speaking about children because we're the children's organizations. Of course, we work for children and their communities. That translates into roughly 1.4 billion people which live in those areas affected by high or extremely high water vulnerability. If we move to the next slide. Yes, this is a map where you can see the main areas where there is both a combination of physical water scarcity and low access to water and sanitation services. Next slide. Next. Yes, here in this slide, you can see, no, to the previous one, please. In the bottom right side, you can see the current global coverage and the progress since the beginning of this century. So in year 2000, we had 6.1 billion people in the world. The population has increased to 8 billion. And as you can see in the slide in orange and in yellow, we still have a significant proportion of people, 294 million children. That's roughly 700 plus million people who do not have even basic water supply. Basic is a concept from the Millennium Development Goals, not from the new SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So our target is not the 700, it's obviously to start with the 700 million people that currently do not have even basic service levels, but our target is to reach 2.2 billion people who do not the safely managed water supply. Now, if we factor climate change, we have to add more than these 2.2 billion people, because currently, a proportion of those who are currently served with safely managed water supplies services and safely managed sanitation services can be potentially impacted by climate change. So the figure in the top right side shows two groups of target population. On the left side, you have those who do not have access to even basic water services. And on the right side in blue, you have those who currently have at least basic water supply services, but are not currently protected against the impacts of climate change. If we move to the next slide. Yes. So the key messages of this very, very brief introduction are the 436 million children, over 1 billion people living in areas with high or extremely high water vulnerability. As Monica said in her introduction, climate change is first felt through water, too much, too little, too polluted. So this is why the adaptation agenda is very much linked with water. Water is both a common good and an economic good, so it needs to be managed and regulated efficiently. And businesses are investing in water supply. If business is investing in water supply, this can be extended to communities. So there is a critical role that the private sector can play in addressing this climate crisis and this water scarcity crisis. For every dollar invested in water, there is at least a $5 return of investment. So this is a good business for governments. We will discuss later on, is not always that straightforward for private sector, for financiers, domestic finance, etc., who are interested in entering into this business. And the Water Security for All initiative is what I'm going to present next. So let's move to the next section of my brief presentation, which is UNICEF's response to the climate crisis. In year 2020, we developed this Water Security for All initiative, which aims to reach these 1.4 billion people that live in areas affected by high or extremely high water vulnerability. And what we decided is to shift all of our over $1 billion annual portfolio in water supply and sanitation to make it resilient to water supply. And because UNICEF works with partners, we soon realized that it's not just us shifting all of our investments, but is the entire sector that needed to shift. And that's why we are coming with 4 different packages. The first one is what we call the shift package, which is basically helping the entire sector to change the ways of thinking, the ways of working, and to really incorporate climate resilience in the ways of working. The second package is what we call the catalytic package, which is investing in developing climate finance proposals and mobilizing climate finance to the water sector. At the moment, a very, very small proportion. We don't even know for sure, but we estimate that is less than 3%, most likely is far less than 3%, what is currently channeled to water and sanitation from climate finance. So supporting governments in particular to unlock this climate finance is the second of the packages. The third one is on scaling up. So developing some demonstrative infrastructures that can show how to do things differently. And then the last one is on incorporating solar powered energy in the water sector. If we move to the next slide, I'm a bit conscious of the time. We can see 4 key domains of this. One is on service delivery, access to safe water. The second component is on incorporating climate resilient water, sanitation, hygiene to services and communities. We also have a strong emphasis on addressing water scarcity in a growing number of countries that are experiencing water scarcity through water resource assessments, etc. And then the last component is about social cohesion. Water, what we can see is water is at the origin of a growing number of conflicts across the world, but water can be a contributor to peace and stability. Next slide, please. Linkages with the private sector. Here you have some examples on innovation, technical expertise, and water security in businesses. So how businesses can address water security in their operations, which might be relevant for some of you. Next slide. And here you have a slide which I rescued from a presentation. We developed this Water Security for All, say, business case for private partners. And one of the 9 priority sectors that we identified was the fintech, the venture capital and innovative finance sector. So I believe that this super brief presentation of the Water Security for All initiative, I think would be very relevant for some of you. Next slide, please. So I'm moving to the third section, which is on the COP28 and why COP28 is historical and is very important for the water and sanitation sector. The climate negotiations have 2 main components. One is mitigation, the other one is adaptation. On mitigation, last year, they discussed the global stocktake, which is where we are as collectively as a world, as human beings, in addressing the greenhouse gas emissions. Most likely, you heard the words transitioning away from fossil fuels in energy systems as one of the main decisions in COP28. And in addition to this, water was included in the global stocktake, in the kind of the compilation of all the discussions and all the actions made by all countries all over the world, and also a commitment to review the NDCs, the national determined contributions, what each country is committed to contribute to address the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. The next slide is focusing on adaptation, the other pillar of the climate conference. And in adaptation, there was a major development. After several years of negotiations, finally, all parties, all countries in the world, all of them, agreed to approve the global goal on adaptation framework, basically agreeing what means adaptation and what needs to be done in adaptation. And they prioritize 7 thematic areas. One of them is climate resilient water supply and climate resilient sanitation. So one of the 7 priority sectors of the global goal on adaptation is now drinking water and sanitation, which is huge if we consider that just 1 year ago, we were very happy to have water mentioned in one of the texts of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. So this is a major breakthrough for the water sector, because that means hopefully that climate finance is going to move to the water and sanitation sector. And moreover, I would like to add that also water resource management and other elements of water supply for socioeconomic development, such as irrigation, are also part of these 7 thematic priority areas. So water is really at the center of the adaptation agenda. And this is quite new, and this is likely to be a game changer in terms of how the water sector is positioned in the climate finance environment. We move to the next slide. Super quick. That's again, I mean, that's a major thing. Obviously, at the moment, there are still discussions within the global goal on adaptation forums and the climate forums on how to move forward with the definition of metrics to measure adaptation at scale. And UNICEF, together with other partners, such as the Sanitation and Water for All, which is a partnership of over 400 partners. We are currently supporting with the development of a common definition of what climate resilient wash or climate resilient water supply, sanitation, hygiene is, because we need to have consistency and coherence across the sector. Not everything that is being advertised as climate resilient is truly climate resilient. So we need to have consensus within the sector, and this is precisely what we are currently supporting with. And we are also working together with WHO, the World Health Organization, through the joint monitoring program that produce all these fantastic estimates on how many people lives without access to drinking water, to develop indicators for climate resilient WASH as well. And as UNICEF, of course, we continue mobilizing resources and partners through this Water Security for All initiative. If we move to the next slide, I'm almost done from now. In terms of financing, most likely you heard a lot about this Lost and Damaged Fund, which is intended to mobilize additional funding to the mitigation and the adaptation agenda to balance the loss and damages caused by climate change. There is also some progress in terms of climate finance mobilized for both mitigation and adaptation. Apparently, in 2022, the world reached the 100 billion annual investments in climate finance that was committed in 2015 during the Paris Agreement. Although there are still some limitations in terms of how this money is being challenged and who channel and who is receiving these funds. What we see is that middle income countries are usually a better place to reach climate finance, and the least developed countries, who are the ones who often need this money the most, are struggling to mobilize this money. And then, of course, there is a lot specifically on adaptation, climate finance specifically for adaptation, which I believe with the new global goal on adaptation framework is going to change for good for the water and sanitation sector, and what to do next after this 100 billion commitment is met, because the needs are increasing as we are entering into, I would say, unknown waters in terms of climate change in the planet. And I think that's all from my side. I don't think I have any more slides. Hopefully we will have more time to discuss later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge. Before going on to Dr. Max, I'd like just to give a brief overview. I think it was you introduced the term water vulnerability, which is quite crucial to understand the problem. You also tell us about how UNICEF is working with partners to reimagine the water and sanitation sector through a number of packages, like the CHIP package and the catalytic package, that is to make all those investments all those water systems climate resilient. And it was great also that you gave us an overview of what happened during COP28, which I think sounds like hopeful in the sense that there is finally a global goal on adaptation. Water was part of the final text and mentioning the role of freshwater ecosystems, right? So, and in all, seems like we're finally getting to the recognition that water is to adaptation as energy to the mitigation challenge. And now the question is, and I think, I mean, it was also great to see how you're like helping all the countries to advance those catalytic packages. And with that, I think it's great to have now Dr. Max Wengawenga, Deputy Director of Policy and Planning of the Ministry of Water and Sanitation in Malawi, because then it's like, what is happening at the country level? And I think after that, in the discussion, we also will talk about how to achieve all of those changes, right? And how to drive that reimagining process that you told us about. So Dr. Max John Wengawenga, you already heard his position at the Ministry of Water and Sanitation in Malawi, but he has more than a 20-year career in the civil service in Malawi, which included also the development of Malawi's climate resilient WASH financing strategy, which he will share with us about much more. And that's crucial because that strategy is what's going to support the sector to unlock financial resources for implementing those projects, which is one also of the topics that Jorge talked about the role of climate finance, for example. So with that, thank you very much, Dr. Max, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Monica, and greetings all. It's a great pleasure and honor to join this webinar today. Indeed, I'd like just to share with you a few slides about Malawi's participation in the climate resilience and how we are responding to it. Thank you very much. I may get to the next slide. Great, thank you. So just to give a very quick, Malawi is one of the developing countries in Africa, but we have a vision as a country, and our vision is to be an inclusively, worth, and safely led nation by 2063, and therefore, we are driven by this vision that whatever we're doing, the interventions should be aligned to moving ourselves as a country towards becoming a middle-income country. Your next slide. Thank you. Okay, so we've set ourselves target. Here are 3 indicators. The first one is to do with our target with regards to getting the proportion of the population with access by 2030 that we should have universal access to safe water in the country. This is linked to the this is linked to getting feedback of poor connection. Apologies. I'll try to go a little slowly. Probably that will solve the problem. Or the internet connection. As for the population using improved sanitation services, we are also having our targets that by 2030, we should have 65% of the nation's population having access to improved sanitation. Currently, we are at around 56%. And then we have another target of achieving ODF, and that by 2030, we should have completely zero. If you go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so colleagues, as a country, we are held back by the climate-related disasters. Year in, year out, we are facing climate shocks. 2019, we had the disaster, cyclone Idai, the cyclone Fred. All these climate-related shocks caused serious devastation to our country, and in our sector, the water and sanitation infrastructure got damaged, and that really had so much to our efforts to achieve those targets that I just shared. So as a country, we came up with a climate resilient financing strategy. And therefore, I would just like now to do a climate financing strategy, which is coming in the next slide. Thank you. So, thanks to UNICEF support, as that to really get, okay, I'll try to switch off the camera, maybe that will help. Okay, great. Let me get to know if this is better now. I really apologize that poor network this side is spoiling the presentation. Nonetheless, colleagues, we had developed a Malawi climate resilience WASH financing strategy with the WASH, a climate resilient financing strategy, not just a financing strategy. I think that's what's coming in the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so just slide before. The previous slide, please. Great, thank you. So as a country, we noted that we really needed to have access to improved water and sanitation were estimated at slightly above 150 billion budget, translating to about 150 million US dollars. But then we noted that this actually, we were losing this infrastructure every time we're hit by a disaster. And therefore, we realized that what we needed was actually something that is more in terms of our infrastructure. We realized that we needed to add to this budget estimate so that we have infrastructure that can withstand these climate shocks. That is, if we are to be on track to achieve the SDG 6. Next slide, please. Great. So our major sources of financing, as you're aware, the water and sanitation sector, the major sources of financing include the 3 T's. And these 3 T's, the taxes, the tariffs, the transfers. But still, to get to the level that we needed, we still noted that there's a funding gap. And this is the gap that we noted that could come from commercial loans and concessional loans. Please go ahead, next slide, please. Right. So the issues, we have bottlenecks actually to get all the finances that we need. And these bottlenecks, actually some are to do with the sectoral issues, the supply of services. So it's like a combination of factors that we identify that need to be fixed so that we are able to leverage the available financing that even commercial entities could come into play. We noted that for the commercial actors, like the banks, for instance, to come in, there are issues that as government, we needed to put our house in order. For instance, ensuring that the policies that we are implementing, sector playing a role. Also on the service providers, here we're referring to like utility firms, where we noted that for them to attract private financing, there is need also to demonstrate that utilities should be profit-making rather than loss-making. And we thought that by doing that, then we'll have created the right environment that we should be able now to attract more financing. On the financiers also themselves, we've reached out to them that, you know, as my colleague Jorge from UNICEF indicated, that water is both an economic and a public good. So on the public good itself, you know, in terms of the pricing of the water itself, this is where it makes a difference, this sector. It's kind of a unique sector that we cannot go and full throat and get expensive financing products, because as we do price, we set water tariffs, we need to strike a good balance so that the water should be accessible to the public, even those that are in the low income groups. But at the same time, the utility firms should be able to operate sustainably. And therefore, this is where the issue of having special products, financing products for this sector. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. So here we just listed some of the major areas which we believe that by addressing these areas, in a way, we should be able to also create the right environment to mobilize financing that we need. So one is using non-revenue water, and this is also one of the ways we would attract private financing. Want to reduce the need for rehabilitation. We need to allocate resources for rehabilitation so that we are already dealing with preventive maintenance, which is cheaper than the one that prevention is better than cure. So also, again, we would like in the long run to reduce operational costs by investing in renewable energies. We had in the first presentation also that the east way I want to go is cheaper and also is climate friendly, environmentally friendly technologies. Again, on our part as government, we do our part to also increase the gradually allocation of financing. So this is where we engage the Minister of Finance to be with us. And the performance-based mechanisms to create incentives for the utility company to access financing. I'm glad to share that we've already started this with a project from the World Bank at the moment, where if a utility firm actually performs well, then it unlocks even more financing. And then we have the issue of borrow fund, where we just want to make improvements as well in the way we administer that. And then also would like to take advantage of the climate funding, climate financing, like the one from the COP28, which was mentioned. As a country that is so vulnerable to climate shocks, would like to take advantage of those facilities. And also, as we get in the private sector on board, we want to support market-based approaches. The tariffs, it's always an issue. This actually issue of tariffs, as we all know, is usually a sensitive area. We want to try to maintain low tariffs, but we have also to be practical that the tariffs have to reflect the cost of producing so that we are able to sustain the operations. And the other issue is also making some improvements like in billing, collecting, systems. Also, there is an issue of supporting capacity building in terms of our cities, develop focused large management units. This is on the part of sanitation. And furthermore, issue of regulating, issues of fees, and waste operators to give room for the private players. And then at the end of the day, we would like to have a system that should be able to operate sustainably and be able to recoup whatever investment. Through that way, we think we can attract our private sector, and then we should be able to expand our services to more people. And we can go to the next slide, which is thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for the poor connectivity. I hope you were still able to catch one or two things. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Max. I think it was a bit, maybe sometimes at times low, but your message was quite clear. Thank you for what you shared. I think it was quite inspiring to hear, about how you quite systematically look at that there was a problem because you were investing in systems that every cyclone that you got were being destroyed for a big part. So you are in the phase where you have made the calculations of what you need to make those resilient and climate proof. And at the same time, looking at what can you do in your regulatory environment to enable more private sector participation and investments to make that possible, tapping into also the role of climate finance, maybe to de-risk some of those investments, but also complement your public funds. What I thought it was quite interesting is that when you look at barriers, you didn't look just at the supply of finance, but at the role of service providers, and then also in the number of interventions that you show, there is the whole concept of making them also first credit worthy, having some quick wins, a lot of emphasis on performance-based contracts, which are at the base of any private sector participation, and then also the big challenge of tariffs, right? So I think it was really good to see that you're taking this challenge in a quite, I would say, brave and clear way. With that, we are opening this part, the Q&A part. Some of you already posted questions, and some will be answered through the chat. But we will also, maybe be asking some of you to ask questions verbally. So please continue. Now, just to kickstart this discussion, I would like to ask first to Jorge, because Dr. Max also already referred to the role of the private sector, but I would love to know how do you see it from UNICEF point of view, Jorge, the role of private sector in enabling not just more investments, but better quality investments, right? And within that role, and how is that role different from global corporations versus, for example, local companies? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief and also reply to one of the comments in the chat box. As you can imagine, the water and sanitation sector requires massive amounts of money in the order of $114 billion per year. And not only infrastructures, but also services. So everything that is related with operation and maintenance, professionalization of service provision, etc. However, I think we need to differentiate when we're speaking about private sector participation in the sector. We need to differentiate those who are working on the service provision or around service provision. That could be like the big water operators of big large infrastructures, but also many, we don't know how many, but many small, medium enterprises, the small operators of rural water supply systems, dislodging companies who deliver these services to the people. Now, moving to the finance, I think we also need to differentiate what is or could be eventually channeled through blended finance instruments, through large government-led programs from what I understand is the focus of this platform, which is specifically on microfinance. So how these small, medium enterprises, these local entrepreneurs can get access to cheap finance. They can get access to finance in their countries in some cases, but cheap finance. And that's to me one of the challenges, in particular when speaking about microfinance, because the perceived risk from financiers, in particular in developing countries, in certain developing countries, and the expected return of investment versus what these small businesses, these potential clients can afford and pay is at the moment quite big. So we need to de-risk. I'm sure that you have discussed on many occasions this, but we really need to de-risk, and we really need to make access to finance affordable to those small middle enterprises that more and more are providing water and sanitation services to the communities. I hope I'm replying at least partially to this $1 million question.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean,
we could do a whole webinar just on that question, but thank you, because I think it is quite important also to see the difference in private sector and financing gaps, and definitely we should discuss, and I hope also that Dr. Max has some insights on this question later on in our discussion. Now, I'd like to ask something to Dr. Max, because sometimes when we start to talk about financing, water security, adaptation, we forget the material things we're talking about. And that definition that you were talking about, Jorge, about what is climate resilient wash has to do with how do we come to those very specific investments. So Dr. Max, can you tell us, like, I mean, all of these levers that you plan to move to get more finance to the sector, what is that finance going to use for? Can you give us some tangible examples of the type of projects that you're thinking? And how do you come to shape those projects as Malawi? Thank you.
Great, thank you. That's a very, very good question. Okay, so in Malawi, we are being guided by the Malawi 2063 agenda, as I indicated in that presentation, where we have outlined priority areas. So in this sector, we are looking at water supply schemes. We're looking at multi-purpose dams, issue of catchment area management. We're also looking at issues of wastewater treatment plants. So there we're covering issues of sanitation, we're covering issues of water supply, as well as managing water resources. So these, I would say, are the top areas that would like to get that financing for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's really good, and that immediately brings to other questions also about how you're building that capacity at local level to shape those investments. But I won't go into that because I want to go back to Jorge now and ask also, I mean, you have all these plans, all this catalytic, this shift, right, that you see that is needed, but which barriers do you see in the countries you're working on, for example, for the use of public-private partnerships or private sector participation? Which trade-off, dilemmas, and do you face, and maybe what are some of those lessons learned?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a very relevant question. And I think it's also linked with what Stephanie was mentioning in the chat box, that she doesn't believe about the risking. I was about to start with precisely with the risking, and allow me to elaborate a little bit further. One of the current discussions, in particular promoted by the World Bank, is about creditworthiness of service providers. The World Bank, as you know, is lending lots of money, but they struggle to sign agreements with public water utilities because, in many cases, because of political reasons, they operate at a loss. So how can you expect a water utility to repay a loan to the World Bank or to a domestic bank in the country it operates if they're not getting any profit? They are actually receiving a subsidy from the government to operate and maintain in a very precarious way. So tariff is often the elephant in the room in terms of addressing this creditworthiness. It is never a good time to raise tariffs. And as Dr. Max Wengawenga said during his intervention, we have tariffs, we have transfers, taxes, and the World Bank often says, and trouble. Tariffs. Tariffs is the trouble because nobody wants to raise tariffs. It's not politically interesting, but unless we value the cost of producing, transporting, and delivering water and sanitation service to the communities, I believe that many of these potential clients of microfinance institutions are unlikely to be able to be creditworthy, and that's why I'm coming with this de-risking, because obviously there is a risk perceived, which is reasonable when you understand the specificities of certain service providers in the water and sanitation sector. In urban water supply, for instance, they operate in a monopoly, so they own the network, so they're the only operators. But of course, this comes with many strings attached, as you know. So therefore, the political influence for good and for bad is there. So we should not underestimate. To solve this, to me, yeah, sorry, I think going a little bit over time, but I think we need to really work more closely with governments, with the private sector, to try to find ways of collaboration and moving forward on this. Apologies for being a bit too long on this.
No, thank you. Thank you. But because, yeah, as we're approaching the closing, I want to make a very quick questions to Dr. Max and then bring us all to a little bit of a closing. So, I mean, you told us about performance-based contract, right? That's one of the levers, but which, like, more in detail, some delivery models and levels of private sector participation do you see possible? Which models and levels of that participation do you see possible for different services and market segments? Like, what would be like a no-go area for private sector, for example, or the go area for these investments?
Right. Thank you. So I like that one, that indeed it's a sector that will have, okay, you can go up to this point. That's very true. So what I see from the experience here, where we say private sector, please come, let's do this together, is when we talk about financing. I think there we really looking as more private sector, largely, especially different the commercial banks, but we are looking at special loans, not the ones that market charging market interest rate. No. As for the where we are saying this particular one, I think it's for the government. This is where we talk of now having operating the water supply systems. Those ones, because we're looking at issues of quality, and also we're looking at issues of ensuring that the pricing itself is not just for profit maximization, no, but we would like to strike a good balance. So the PPP models are welcome in Malawi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, first I want to give you, the two of you, like, opportunity to, in one sentence, say anything else you would like to share with the audience, and then I want to give final summary of what we discussed. So Jorge, anything you want to say to finalize?
Yeah, maybe to go back to, I think, one of the first questions that was asked in the chat box about the social agenda, the SDG agenda, and the climate agenda. Some people still perceives that those are competing each other. Some even say, why should we still talk about SDGs when we have the climate crisis hitting everywhere, everybody? I don't believe there is a much divergence between the two agendas, and I actually believe there are lots of synergies. So you can work on climate change adaptation and address some of the SDGs, such as safe drinking water and sanitation. So actually, the global goal adaptation framework really kind of brings together these two very important agendas. So it's more about how do you keep thinking about the impacts of climate change in both mitigation and adaptation, as some colleagues suggested in the chat box, when doing investments and when providing water and sanitation services. And last but not least, again, I think we need to work together more closely. I sense in many occasions the finance experts and the wash experts, the engineers, talk different languages. We really need to come together, understand each other, and work together if we want, to the sector to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good point. Dr. Max?
Thank you very much. And once again, it was a great pleasure to participate here. I would also just like to end on the note of the need to have actually tailor-made financing products for the sector, so that we are able to have actually products and create room for the PPPs, as well as that our approach should be really holistic, because the water sanitation sector is complex. But if we really approach it holistically, of working together, the financiers, the engineers, everyone, economists, then we can really get to where we want to be. That's still aiming at universal access to safe water and sanitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. With that, before we go into the closing, there is a person on the attendees, Poi-san, who has his hand or her hand raised. So do you want to please share with us your insights or your question? Hi, Poi, we don't hear you yet. Oh, okay. Sorry, we might have taken a little too long to react, but thank you for participating. I mean, first of all, thank you to both panelists for bringing, I think, quite open the tasks ahead. There are signs of hope. There is certainly an increasing awareness that we need to work on the climate resilience of our water and sanitation systems, else everything we do, it's going backwards every time we're hit by a disaster. And that we need to be quite innovative in this process. And I think I like the words you put in your presentation, Jorge, about reimagining, and also Dr. Max on the different aspects that need to be tackled, because I think as a water sector quite long we have been looking inward, and water is a human right, but to make it possible to everyone to access, we need to have these open discussions about how do we make more money flow to the sector for better quality projects. And that might ask us to rethink and reimagine things that we have held very long fixed, right? So we need to be resourceful, trying to bring in much more climate finance to the sector. That will require, as Jorge said, also that we make sure every investment we're doing in the sector is climate resilient. Otherwise, we can't attract that financing. And at the same time, how at all levels we leverage the capacity of the private sector. And that I like about your presentation, Dr. Max, that it's not just about the money of the private sector, it's the expertise. And that thinking in economic and value generation terms, that is simply not always in the private sector, and that's fine, right? How do we build in that? How do we build on the strengths of both? Because this is not a competition. It's more like everyone effort is needed to achieve it. So, and out of that, I mean, I think there are quite some things that we touch upon that will need much more discussion about. Is it about the risking of first thinking on the credit worthiness of those utilities? How about private sector participation and tariff? Are they really always trouble? Can we find ways that they are not the trouble element on the financing? But yeah, very much to go ahead, and thank you thank you very much to the European Microfinance Platform, of course, for bringing us together and having this discussion. Please send your questions. Also, I mean, you can still type your questions in the chat, and we will try to go back to them either now or after. And I don't know, Jack, would you like to add anything, or from the hosts, anything to close this webinar?
No, just to close off, thank you guys very much for coming and working with us on this. And I really do think it was a fruitful discussion. And you know, there's a lot of things to do going forward. So yeah, thank you guys very much, and to the attendees for being here as well, but especially our moderator and our speakers. And I believe the tech people in Luxembourg know what to do about closing off, but that's from me. Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.